The rain that afternoon didn't fall angrily. It came down with the old patience of someone who has seen too much to be in any hurry. Helena knew how to recognize different kinds of rain. She had learned to read the sky the way one reads the expression on a familiar face, and that evening the sky wore the faded gray of a bedsheet washed so many times it had lost its original color. She stood by the living room window, her hands folded over her apron, her fingers still smelling of the lye soap she had used to scrub the kitchen floor. She had been doing the same things for 3 years, scrubbing, mending, stitching, postponing. 3 years in which the house had seemed too large for a single person's breath. Joaquim had died in February during one of those winters that hardened both the ground and people's hearts. They had brought him back in a covered wagon, and even now Helena could remember the sound of the wheels grinding over wet gravel, that creaking noise that seemed to say nothing would ever be easy again. They had married young, so young that her father had laughed and said it looked like children playing at marriage. But there had been nothing playful about it. They had shared 9 years of ordinary days, days Helena only understood afterward, once they were gone, to have been the most precious thing she would ever possess. A man who whistled in tune while repairing the fence. A man who always saved the first fig from the tree for her, the ripest one, even when there were hardly any. A man who, during the war, wrote letters that never mentioned fear, only how much he missed her, because he didn't want her to worry. And then came silence. The letters stopped. First came the rumors, then certainty, then his photograph in a black frame on top of the dresser. Helena put on morning clothes and never took them off again, not because tradition demanded it, but because black seemed like the only honest color she had left. Turning the house into a boarding house hadn't been her idea, it had been necessity. The money Joaquim left behind lasted about as long as morning dew, and one day, Helena looked at the 2 empty bedrooms at the back of the house and realized she would either have to open the door of her grief to strangers or go hungry. She posted a small notice at Mr. Elias's general store. Room for rent, woman alone in house, respectable men only. Few came, even fewer stayed. The town was small, and small-minded people in small towns talked. A young widow renting rooms to men gave idle tongues more than enough to chew on. Helena heard them, pretended she didn't, and kept scrubbing the floors as though she might scrub their words out of the world along with the dirt. It was on an afternoon just like that, beneath a rain that carried no anger, that he knocked on her door. Helena took a moment before answering. Not because she hadn't heard him, but because a stranger's knock still tightened something inside her chest. A foolish remnant of hope that perhaps one day someone would knock, and it would be Joaquim, and everything that had happened would turn out to have been some terrible mistake. She dried her hands on her apron and opened the door. The man stood partly turned away, glancing down the passage behind him like someone accustomed to calculating escape routes without even thinking about it. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, soaked across the shoulders, and a low-brimmed hat that hid part of his face. In one hand, he carried a battered leather suitcase, the kind that looked as though it had crossed continents without ever telling anyone what it had seen. When he turned toward her, Helena saw a tired face, several days of beard, and pale eyes that always seemed halfway to asking a question they never quite asked. "Do you rent rooms?" he asked. His voice was low, slightly rough, the voice of a man who didn't speak unless he had something to say. "I do," Helena replied, studying him. "To respectable men." "I'm a respectable man." He didn't smile, didn't defend himself. He said it the way someone might mention the weather. And strangely, it was precisely that lack of effort to charm her that made Helena step back and open the door a little wider. His name was Tomás. He didn't offer a last name right away, and she didn't ask for one. He paid the first month in advance, counting the coins slowly onto the table as though every one of them resisted leaving his hand. He told her he was a traveler, that he took whatever work he could find, and that he might stay for a few weeks, maybe less. Helena showed him the room at the back of the house, the smaller one with a window overlooking the vegetable garden. He looked around at the room, the narrow bed, the chipped porcelain wash basin, and said it was more than enough. Then he placed his suitcase carefully in one corner with a gentleness that didn't seem to belong with such worn leather. Helena noticed. She didn't yet know why she noticed. During the first few days, they hardly spoke. Tomás left early and returned late, his hands always dirty from one job or another. He hauled sacks at the warehouse, repaired the church roof, helped the blacksmith. The town had distrusted him on sight, as small towns distrust nearly everything that comes from somewhere else, but little by little it lowered its guard around a man who worked quietly and owed nobody anything. Helena left his supper on the table and went to her room. He always thanked her in that same quiet voice, then ate alone by lamplight, staring into nothing as though replaying scenes only he could see. But loneliness does things to people whether they want it to or not. Loneliness brings people together the way the tide carries pieces of wreckage onto the same shore. Without meaning to, Helena began noticing Tomás. She noticed that he always cleaned his plate, never wasting so much as a grain of food, like someone who had truly known hunger. She noticed that sometimes he stopped at the kitchen doorway and simply listened to the sounds of her cooking without coming inside, as though those small domestic noises soothed something in him. She noticed that he repaired the gate hinge that had squeaked for months without anyone asking him to, and that he did it in the middle of the night so no one would have a chance to thank him. One night, Helena couldn't sleep. The house made those little cracking sounds only old houses make, and the wind slipped through a gap somewhere, whistling the name of no one. She went downstairs for a glass of water and found Tomás sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, his face briefly illuminated whenever the tip of his cigarette glowed. "Can't sleep?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. "Haven't been able to for a long time," he said. "You get used to it. It's not a good thing, but you get used to it." They sat in silence for a while. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Then Tomás put out the cigarette and, without looking at her, said, "This is a good house. It has a kind of peace you don't find much out there." Helena didn't answer, but that night after returning to her room, she cried for the first time in months, and even she couldn't have said exactly why. Maybe because a stranger had called peace what she had always called emptiness. Maybe because, for the first time since February, someone had spoken a gentle sentence inside those walls. A few nights later, a gust of wind blew out the lamp in the living room while Helena was mending a shirt. The room went dark. Tomás happened to be walking through the hallway. He struck a match and relit the wick for her without a word. Before leaving, though, he noticed the shirt in her hands and said, almost absent-mindedly, that his mother used to mend clothes the same way, biting through the thread instead of cutting it with scissors. That was all. A meaningless little sentence. A memory of a dead mother shared in a dark hallway. But Helena held on to those words the way someone might keep a rare coin. And that night, for the first time in 3 years, she wondered whether her house might be something more than the place where she waited for death to come for her slowly. Maybe it could still be a place where life happened, stubbornly. In corners, through cracks, in small gestures no one ever planned to make. The weeks passed, and winter slowly began to loosen its grip on the earth. Tomás was still there, even though he had originally spoken of staying only a few weeks. No one in town commented on it anymore because they had grown used to seeing him. Helena, meanwhile, had begun to dread the day he might tell her he was leaving. Not that anything existed between them. Nothing did, at least nothing that could be spoken aloud. There was only a growing tenderness, a quiet consideration for one another that didn't ask to be named. Helena had begun cooking a little more without admitting to herself that she was cooking for him. Tomás had begun coming home a little earlier without admitting to himself that he was coming home because of her. One afternoon, Helena decided to clean the back room while Tomás was working at the mill. She did it from time to time with all her boarders, airing the sheets, sweeping the dust. It was part of the arrangement. She opened the window and shook out the bedspread. Then, while pushing the broom beneath the bed, she struck the battered leather suitcase. The suitcase shifted. Its lid, which had not been properly closed, opened slightly. Something framed in cardboard slipped from inside and fell face down onto the floor. Helena hesitated. She wasn't the kind of woman who went through other people's belongings. Poverty had taken many things from her, but it had never taken that kind of dignity. Still, the object had fallen out, and she had to put it back. To do that, she had to turn it over. The moment she did, the world stopped. It was a photograph. A photograph of her. Not just any photograph. That photograph. The only portrait Joaquim had asked her to have taken before he left for the war at Mr. Almeida's photography studio in the city. Helena, at 25, her hair pinned up, her high-collared dress, the solemn expression the camera seemed to demand, though it hadn't been able to erase all the brightness from the face of a woman deeply in love. She remembered that day. She remembered Joaquim holding the picture before he left, telling her he would keep it close to his heart, that it would be his shield, his lucky charm, his reason to come home. But Joaquim hadn't come home, and the photograph Helena had imagined lost in some wartime ditch beside her husband's body was now in her hands, inside the suitcase of a man she had known for less than 2 months. Her legs gave way. Helena dropped to her knees on the threadbare rug, the photograph trembling between her fingers. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear her own blood rushing in her ears. How? Why did this stranger have her photograph? What did it mean? 1,000 possibilities flashed through her mind, and not one of them was good. A thief? A fraud? Someone who had been watching her? Or something worse? Something she couldn't even put into words? That was how Tomás found her. He had returned earlier than usual, as he had begun doing lately, and as he passed down the hallway, he saw the bedroom door open. Helena was kneeling on the floor, tears covering her face, the photograph in her hands. He stopped in the doorway. He didn't say a word, and in that moment, his silence was the loudest confession Helena had ever heard. "Where did you get this?" Her voice came out broken, barely more than a whisper. "This picture is mine. That's me. My husband took it with him. How do you have it?" Tomás leaned against the doorframe. Slowly, he removed his hat. For a moment, he looked far older than he really was, as if all the weariness in the world had landed on his shoulders at once. "I was going to tell you," he said, and his voice cracked. "I swear I was. I was just waiting for the right time." "There was never a right time." "Tell me what?" Helena stood up. Now she was angry. Anger was the only solid ground she had left beneath her feet. "Who are you?" He took a long time to answer. When he finally did, he looked directly into her eyes. His own were wet. "I was there," he said. "The day Joaquim died, I was beside him." The room seemed to shrink around her. Helena grabbed the bed frame for support. Hearing her husband's name spoken by that man felt like a stone dropping into a bottomless well. Tomás spoke quietly, but every word came out clearly, as though he had rehearsed them for years. "We served together. Same trench. 4 months. 4 months is a long time in a place like that. 4 months of mud and cold are enough to learn almost everything there is to know about a man." He swallowed. Joaquim wasn't like the others. He didn't hate anyone. You understand? War fills men with hatred because hatred is easier to carry than fear. But not Joaquim. What he carried was longing. He talked about you all the time. About this house, the fig tree, the way you hummed to yourself without realizing you were doing it. Tomás looked at the photograph. He showed this picture to everyone. We all knew your face by heart before we truly knew his. Helena pressed the photograph against her chest. The tears were falling freely now, and she no longer tried to stop them. "One morning before dawn," Tomás continued, "they attacked our flank. It happened fast. It was terrible. The kind of thing your mind can never put back in the right order afterward." He paused. Joaquim was hit. "I dragged him behind a wall, but I knew. You learned to know those things over there. He knew too." Tomás drew in a breath. And even knowing it, he didn't ask for help. He didn't call out to God. He didn't cry. He took this photograph from his pocket, from where he kept it against his chest, just like he had promised you he would. Helena's fingers tightened around the frame. He took my hand and said, "Tomás, if you get out of here alive, and one of us has to, do something for me. Find Helena, give her the photograph back, and tell her the last thing I thought about wasn't fear. It was her humming in the kitchen on a sunny Sunday." The kitchen? Helena covered her mouth with one hand. She did hum on Sundays while she baked bread. She had never told anyone. She had barely even noticed she did it. Only Joaquim knew. Only Joaquim. And now the man standing in front of her. "And it took you 3 years," she said. There was no accusation in her voice, only disbelief. 3 years? Tomás lowered his eyes. "It did," he admitted. "And that's where my shame begins. That's why I couldn't tell you." He took a slow breath. "I made a promise to a dying man that I would find his wife. But when the war ended, when I came home and started looking for you, I couldn't make myself come all the way here." He looked toward the floor. "I got close to town and turned back, more than once. I would sit beside some road with your photograph in my hand and find that I still didn't have the courage to knock on your door." His voice roughened. "Because how was I supposed to do that? How was I, the man who survived, supposed to look into the eyes of the widow of the man who didn't?" He looked up. "What right did I have?" Helena remained silent. "Joaquim was a better man than I was, Helena. He deserved to come home more than I did. How could I come here and say, I'm the man who watched your husband die and couldn't stop it?" Helena listened without moving. Her anger had dissolved. In its place was something more complicated, something deeper, something she still didn't know how to name. "But there's something else," Tomás said. Now his voice truly trembled. He seemed to have to fight for every word. "And this is the worst part. Maybe you'll throw me out after I tell you, and you'd have every right to." He looked at the photograph. "For 3 years I carried your picture with me. I looked at it every night." Helena said nothing. "At first I looked at it because it represented the promise I still hadn't kept. My burden, my guilt." He hesitated. "But time passes. People are weak. And after a while I started looking at your face differently." His eyes closed briefly. "I started getting to know you through everything Joaquim had told me. Through the stories he repeated. Through the way he talked about you." His next words came slowly, and without meaning to, without ever touching your hand, without ever hearing your voice. "I fell in love with you, Helena." She stopped breathing. "With the woman in the photograph. With my dead friend's wife." Tomás shook his head. "It's the most shameful thing a man could do, and I did it." His voice almost failed. "And that's why, when I finally found the courage to come here, I couldn't introduce myself the way I should have. I rented a room like any other stranger." He looked helplessly at her. "Because I wanted I only wanted to see for a few days whether you were happy, whether you were all right, whether you still hummed. He swallowed hard. I wanted to know that somehow my promise to Joaquim had been kept, that as Helena was truly living, not merely surviving. His eyes dropped. And if you were fine, I was going to leave the photograph somewhere you would find it. Then I would leave without ever telling you who I was. A pause. I was going to leave you in peace. The silence that followed lasted a long time. Outside, the rain had begun again. The same patient rain. Helena looked at the photograph. At that 25-year-old woman who had been loved so deeply by two men. One who had died with her face in his memory. Another who had lived for 3 years with nothing but her face for company. And in one painful flash of understanding, she realized there was no villain in this story. There was only loneliness, and what loneliness does to hearts that no longer have anything left to lean on. "Get out," she finally said. The words came out dry. Tomás lowered his head. He nodded slowly, like a man who had expected nothing else. Then he put his hat back on. "Forgive me," he said. "I'll get my suitcase and—" "No," Helena interrupted him. "Get out of the room. I need to be alone." He stopped. I'm not telling you to leave the house. I'm telling you to leave me alone tonight." She looked away. "We'll talk tomorrow." Tomás stared at her, surprised. He searched her eyes for some sign of a trap, some cruelty. There was none. Only the exhaustion of a woman who had just been handed all at once a piece of grief she had believed was already buried. He left without another word, and he closed the door with the same care he brought to everything he did. Helena didn't sleep that night. She sat on the large bed she had once shared with Joaquim, placed the photograph in her lap, and spoke to her dead husband in a way she hadn't done in a long time. Not aloud, inside her mind, the way we speak to those who have gone. She asked whether he had known, whether, when he gave that photograph to Tomás, he had understood what else he might be giving him. She asked whether he was angry. And sometime in the middle of the night, Helena understood that Joaquim wasn't angry, because Joaquim, the Joaquim she had known, the man who always saved the ripest fig for her, would never have wanted her to spend the rest of her life kneeling before a black picture frame. Joaquim had entrusted the photograph to a good man. And sometimes, good men fall in love without intending to. It wasn't a crime. It was only life being stubborn enough to continue, even in the places where we swear it has already ended. At dawn, Helena went downstairs. Tomás was already standing beside the front door, suitcase in hand, hat on his head. He had decided to leave without waiting for their conversation, hoping to spare her from having to ask him. When he saw her, he straightened his back like a man preparing himself for goodbye. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked. Tomás blinked. "I thought it might be easier for you if I—" "Put the suitcase down," Helena said. He put it down. It landed against the wooden floorboards with a dull thud. Helena walked closer. She had the photograph in her hand. She held it out to him. Tomás instinctively stepped back, confused. "It's yours," she said. Then she stopped. "No, that's not exactly what I mean." She glanced down at it. "Joaquim asked you to return it. You returned it. You kept your promise?" She looked back at him. "But I don't want this photograph sitting on a dresser beside a memorial candle anymore, as though I died with him." Her voice softened. "Keep it, if you want, or I'll keep it. We can decide later." She drew in a breath. "What I really want to say is something else." Tomás waited without breathing. "Yesterday, when you told me everything," Helena continued, her voice trembling but steady, "I was angry, then I was afraid." She paused. "And later, in the middle of the night, I felt something worse than anger or fear." Tomás watched her carefully. "I felt sorry for both of us." Her eyes filled. "Because we've both been alone for too long, Tomás. You've been carrying the guilt of surviving. I've been carrying the guilt of still being alive." Her gaze dropped to the photograph. "And I kept asking myself, what would Joaquim have wanted?" She looked at him. "He entrusted you with the most precious thing he had." Tomás's jaw tightened. "He looked you in the eyes during the last moments of his life and chose you, out of all the men in that trench, to carry my face back to me." Helena gave a faint, broken smile. "Joaquim didn't choose badly. He never did." She looked around the house. "He chose me. He chose this house. And he chose you for that promise." She took one more step toward Tomás. "If he trusted you enough to carry my photograph across the world against your heart, who am I not to trust you?" Tomás's eyes filled. One tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Wiping it away would have meant pretending he wasn't crying, and he was tired of pretending. "I'm not asking anything from you," Helena said. And now she was smiling. A small, tear-wet smile. her first real smile in 3 years. "I'm not asking for love, or promises, or a future." And she gave a soft, almost bitter laugh. "We already know too much about what life can do to promises." Her expression grew tender. "I'm only asking you to stay." Tomás stared at her. "Not as a boarder." Helena searched for the words. As a man who loved Joaquim too, in his own way." She looked toward the kitchen. "As someone who knows how to hum with me in the kitchen on a sunny Sunday." Then she looked back at him. "Stay, Tomás." Her voice fell almost to a whisper. "This house is too large for only one person's breath." A pause. "It always has been." He couldn't answer immediately. He set his hat on the table. Then he took one step toward her, then another, and stopped in front of her. The two men who had loved Helena were somehow together in that moment. One alive, one dead, a photograph between them, and Tomás, the man who had survived a war without crying, who had dragged dying friends to safety without falling apart, who had carried guilt for 3 years without confessing it to anyone, finally wept. He wept with relief. He wept because perhaps a man's greatest pain isn't losing something. Perhaps it is believing he can never be forgiven. And there, in a kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and lye soap, Tomás finally was forgiven. They didn't embrace right away. It wouldn't have been true. The love beginning between them wasn't the kind found in cheap romances, all fire and urgency. It was something else, slower, deeper, made from the same things that make anything worth keeping endure. Respect, shared grief, gratitude. Two lonely people finally recognizing loneliness in someone else. They sat at the table. Helena made coffee. And they remained there talking about Joaquim, laughing at some memories and crying over others, until the sun climbed high and the rain finally stopped for good. The days that followed were ordinary days, and Helena, who had learned through grief the enormous value of ordinary days, knew how to savor them. Tomás continued working around town, but he always came home in time for dinner, and now he walked into the kitchen instead of lingering outside it. He repaired everything that needed repairing. The gate never squeaked again. The crack where the wind used to whistle was finally sealed. The town, which loved a good story almost as much as it loved a good piece of gossip, took a while to understand what it was seeing. Then it understood. And eventually, something rare, it approved. Widow Helena had found herself some company, people said. Respectable company. The photograph returned to the dresser, but it wasn't alone. And there was no funeral candle beside it. Helena had a new frame made from pale wood. Next to the photograph of herself as a young woman, she placed a picture of Joaquim when he was young, the one in which he was laughing with all his teeth showing, taken at a celebration before the war. The two photographs, side by side, stopped being an altar. They became a memory. And Helena learned that memory isn't a chain that keeps us trapped. It is a root that holds us steady. One Sunday morning, months later, Tomás woke to a sound he hadn't heard in a long time. He remained in bed with his eyes closed, trying to understand what it was. Then he recognized it. A quiet, tuneful voice coming from the kitchen. A woman humming while she baked bread, unaware she was doing it. Exactly the way a man behind some wall in a faraway war had described it with his final breath. Tomás placed a hand over his chest, over the spot where for 3 years he had carried a photograph. And there he felt a heart beating, a heart that finally understood why it was still beating. He rose slowly, walked to the kitchen and leaned against the doorframe, the way he had in the beginning when all he dared to do was listen from a distance. But this time, Helena turned. She saw him, and she didn't stop humming. She simply held out her hand, flour dusting her fingers. Tomás took it, and the two of them stood there in the Sunday light, humming together a wordless song. It had been Joaquim's song, and now it belonged to them too. Outside, the fig tree, which had finally come back to life after so many winters, was bearing its first fruit of the year, and the ripest fig of all, the one on the highest branch, waited patiently for a hand to pick it and offer it to someone dearly loved, as it always had been, as it always would be.